Okay, so here we go. First, we're going to have the great Getman. Are you ready? In this corner, the great Getman. Jessica Getman is an associate professor of music here at CSUSB and a film musicologist. And these bios are so short compared to their true expansive amazingness. A film musicologist focusing on music and television and science fiction media. Her research interests also include popular music, amateur music, critical editing, historically informed performance practice, and 20th century American music. Formerly the managing editor of the George and Ira Gershwin Critical Edition, she also co-edited the collection Music in Star Trek, Sound, Utopia, and the Future, and is an editor for the forthcoming Oxford Handbook of Music and Television. Oh my God, are you kidding me? What an honor to be a colleague with Jessica Getman. Please welcome her.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to do that thing where I share PowerPoints because I'm that kind of teacher. So that kind of colleague. I want to slideshow. Oh, I don't need notes on it, so I can just do the slideshow. Okay. Um, okay. And then share my screen. Okay. Share. Okay. So keeping this quick is I'm gonna do my very, very best. So I teach over in the music department, and mostly I get to teach all of our music history classes, but a lot of our GE classes, which is a lot of fun, kind of my favorite stuff to do. But when I'm talking about my research, I do mostly work in media and music surrounding science fiction, not only science fiction, but in the area kind of surrounding science fiction, kind of moving a little into fantasy sometimes. So that is kind of where my research really sits. I've got a number of things going on right now. A few of the items on this list are pretty much done. I'm just waiting for them to get published. So I've got the book chapter on the TV musical and the Magicians. That one's done. I've got the the Star Trek parody chapter, which was a lot of fun because it was basically just talking about all the different ways that Star Trek has been parodized in the last, 50 years. So that has been really exciting, and that one's pretty much done. Um, but there are some projects that I'm currently working on. One of them is kind of the kind of old school musicology uh, uh, score work. So I'm working on the symphonic score critical edition for Rhapsody in Blue by George Gershwin, which will be finished probably early next year. The first page is up there on the screen. Um, for those who might want to see it. So kind of doing that, I don't know, I call it old school musicology, and I love it. I love digging into the minutia of scores and the minutia of, what was the composer intending. So that's been fun to work on. And I am currently, the big things that I'm working on right now are, of course, that Oxford Handbook of Music and Television, which we're almost done with. It'll be done, hopefully, at least uh, to the publisher within a within a month, I think. Crossing fingers. And I've got a chapter in there that I'm finishing up. And then I finally have a book contract with Oxford for music in the original series of Star Trek. So I'm really excited about that too. So those are the big things that I'm working on right now. Um, and then uh, Jessica says, I assume there's a lot of theremin involved. Actually, you'd be surprised. So, yes, we do run into a lot of theremin in science fiction music, but Star Trek actually used no theremin at all, which is really fascinating because everyone is like convinced that there's a theremin in there, and there's absolutely not. So, it's kind of interesting the ways that, yeah, the composers and the musicians are tricking us with sound, because we would totally think that it would be there. So I'm going to give myself, I don't know how I'm going to do this, like 7 minutes to kind of go over. Yeah, yeah, it's just the human voice. It's a coloratura soprano singing in the theme, which is really kind of cool. Um, but so yeah, I'm gonna give myself like 7 minutes to talk about um, one of the projects that I'm working on, which is this chapter on pushing the limits, and then which is basically I'm writing just a quick survey of music and science fiction TV for this handbook that we're putting together. So like really just covering like 10 series really quickly in 6,000 words, which is a lot of fun. But so I'll cover some of that material, but this is also material that is relevant, excuse me, relevant and going to be used in the book project as well. So um, I get very, very interested in terms of like how science fiction works as social commentary. That's one of my big ideas that excites me. So when we're talking about science fiction, from anthology shows like The Twilight Zone to franchises like Star Trek to reboots like Battlestar Galactica, science fiction TV is not just capturing our imagination, but also having us question our political and social assumptions and having us imagine our world but better. And so the diverse soundtracks that we have in science fiction assist in this social um, job that the genre is doing, and whetting our interests, but also pushing the limits of how we think about our society, but also pushing the limits of aesthetics, which I know Kevin loves that word, aesthetics. Um, how they affect us through musical exoticism. So, um, I musical exoticism is really interesting. It's frequently expressed through some level of appropriation from real world cultural practices. So, for instance, the use of the timbre of the Chinese erhu or the microtones of classical Indian music to kind of delineate between characters on screen that kind of represent the self and characters who represent the other. So very often these kind of appropriative musical exoticisms kind of tell us who is us and who is them, right? Um, so very often, however, because science fiction is dealing with difference in terms of not just ethnicity and social identity, but also in terms of biology and technology and time and place, this musical exoticism can be expressed through music that is simply different. So it's not necessarily appropriated. It can also be different in some other sort of oral way. Yeah, and yeah, Chad, absolutely. Orientalism is all over this. So, um, uh, so basically, using composition, so using electronic sounds or pulling together sounds through electronic composition, our ears hear that as something, quote, different and something, quote, futuristic. So that kind of creates this musical exoticism that highlights the other, or the highlighting the other, highlighting the future, highlighting something that's in a place far, far away from here, that sort of thing. So we use electronic composition, but also modernist and postmodernist styles from the 20th and 21st century that also sound very different. So atonality, things like polytonality, 12-tone writing, neoclassicism at times, stylistic hybridity, which is really interesting. So mixing Western and non-Western music together as a way to highlight otherness. So in science fiction, this idea of musical exoticism moves beyond appropriation and into things like electronic composition and kind of avant-garde modernist or postmodernist styles. So I think I don't have a ton of time and I want to make sure everyone has time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show my example from the Orions, which is really interesting. So I've got an example from the original series here, which was, 1966, and then Enterprise, Star Trek Enterprise, which was the very beginning of the 21st century. Um, and so let me go. Sorry, I'm moving through here to some examples. Okay, so you can see here that the Orions were represented in the original series as being very sexy. There was a quote Orion slave girl approach to this, which is obviously problematic, but it was also made to be problematic in the series as well. It wasn't supposed to be a good thing that she was a slave. So on the left side here, you can see the Orion from the original series. On the right side, you can see Orions from Enterprise. And musically, they're treated a little bit different. The original series uses a um, this Orientalist approach, this using instruments that evoke the Middle East, evoke India, parallel fourths, these sorts of signifiers of otherness. Whereas what the Enterprise soundtrack does is it says, okay, they used an evocative sort of electropop music as the women were dancing to emphasize this otherness. So there's a couple you see both approaches, and this is separated by like almost, what would that be, 50 years, no, 40 years of, social change. So here is the original series, Orion Girls, and the Enterprise.
Nice place you have here, Mr. Blake.
So that's both exoticizing and eroticizing, but using the appropriative in one example, appropriative exoticism in one, and electronic and popular music exoticism in the other, which is really kind of interesting. So I have a whole lot more that I could talk about regarding this. I think that I'm going to go ahead and leave it there so that everyone has time. And yeah, this is the type of stuff that I like to research. So if you guys have any questions, I would love to take them, and I'll take them in chat. So thank you. Oops.
Wow, incredible. Woo! Can you believe it? Can you believe it? 5 stars. Okay, genius. I love it. So yeah, chat's great. Questions there. Jessica can read them over, think about them, and we can hear from Erin. Erin Hall, amazing colleague. I get to know her in the English department, so she's beyond any bio we could even give. But Erin Hall joined CSUSB in 2020 after completing a PhD in linguistics at the University of Toronto. Her research focuses on the intersection between language acquisition and sociolinguistics, including how children learn their local dialects and contribute to language change. She's also a licensed speech language pathologist with over 12 years of experience working with children and adults with communication disorders. And as a colleague, I can just note that she has worked tremendously hard in developing this first-rate speech and language pathology program that's part of our English department. It is just stunning. We're so proud of her. Please welcome Erin Hall.
Thank you. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks so much for letting me do this. I'm going to tell you a bit about some collaborations with students in our speech language pathology programs that I've been working on for a couple of years, looking at bilingual speech sound production. So yeah, for anybody who doesn't know, we launched our SLP, our speech language pathology preparatory programs. We have a certificate and a minor program that we launched in fall 2022. And then shortly after that, with my colleague, Jonathan Robinson Anthony, we started a little lab, our language and speech science lab, where we could do some research and get students involved. And as part of our SLP program, I, at that time, was teaching a phonetics and phonology course where we were looking at real speech data in Pratt. And because I am from Canada and my research was on Canadian dialects, that was the data that I had and that we were using in class. But it felt a little like, why are we looking at Canadian English when we're here in California? Even though actually there are quite a lot of lucky similarities between Canadian and California English phonetically. I wanted to also try to find some speech samples of more local speech that our students could relate to a little more easily. So luckily for me, Jonathan had already collected a bunch of data from Spanish, English, bilingual young adults from Southern California with and without a history of receiving speech language services. So we had some typically developing participants and some participants who reported having received speech and language services in the past. So this is a great little treasure trove of data that I didn't have to go collect myself, where I could use this with students to help them apply some of what they were learning in their coursework. And then also for me to start looking at some local dialect features that I might want to later look at in children, since that's where my major interests lie. So to get started then, our sort of broad research questions were just, how can we start to approach this bilingual speech data? We have, and I'll show you some automated tools that use, that take your speech signal and create what's called a text grid that then you can use for phonetic analysis, where it splits that speech signal into like words and speech sounds, and then we could pull out some data. So we have these tools that make that process a lot easier than it used to be, because you used to have to do it all manually. But these are trained, this is a form of AI that's trained on like standard American English, a lot of publicly available corpora of American English. But we don't know as much about how these work with other varieties, right? So I'm using this Spanish influenced English that also includes some Spanish words. So both Spanish and English in these transcripts. How well can these automated tools work? And if they can work, then what can we see in this data? And specifically looking at vowel productions, I'll tell you why shortly, but just take my word for it that vowels are interesting for lots of reasons, and give us a way to look at things, differences that we might see in these participants, like maybe related to language dominance, if they report more English versus Spanish dominance, or this history of having received some speech and language services. So I'll just tell you a little more about these tools, which again are these AI-based tools that can create for us this sort of setup in Pratt, this software that we use for phonetic analysis. They take your audio file, so you see the waveform at the top and the spectrogram below that show the actual speech as it's produced. At the bottom, these automated tools can produce these text grids that split up the speech and show the individual words. So this is an example of a bilingual transcript, starts in Spanish and the sentence ends in English. And it's been divided up into these words, and then the tier above that shows the individual speech sounds. So this is great to be able to use AI to do, because this is a really sort of drudgery kind of task for a human to do, even though of course we want to be checking it as humans. It's a great thing to be able to automate at this point and have a tool do for us to get us started. And it turns out that these tools do work fairly well, about as well as humans. So some research has been done comparing, how well these automated tools can align the speech and divide it into segments. And it's very comparable to human performance, because not all humans agree on exactly how this should be done as well. There are a couple other studies of other dialects, like British varieties and some second language varieties, but nothing that we could find. That was like our first task. Could we find anything that's been done with Spanish influenced English, or with Spanish in general? And we really didn't find that. So that's what we wanted to do, is look at the performance of one of these tools. We found Darla, the Dartmouth Linguistic Automation tool, which is very easy to use. Some of these tools are not that easy to use and involve a lot of downloading of things. But this one is kind of drag and drop, really simple. And again, we already had this data from Jonathan with these interviews with Spanish English bilingual adults, young adults, 18 to 21. So they had done this Jonathan's project is vocabulary focused, looking at cognates, so words that are really similar in Spanish and English, like elephant, elefante kind of thing, right? So they did some vocabulary tasks looking at those words, and then they did this interview kind of task where they talked about how they approached those cognates. So they were using often Spanish words to describe how they approach these vocabulary tasks. So we have, again, these nice bilingual transcripts with mostly English, but a little bit of Spanish. And all these speakers are bilingual, so there's often Spanish influence in the English as well. So we chose 5 files to start with, just to see how well can Darla do this? Can Darla correctly align this speech? So what this involved is, at the bottom here, you see like the Darla tiers that are automatically generated. Then I would go in as the human annotator and make adjustments, listen to the file, look at the spectrograms, and use my phonetic skills to figure out how correct is Darla. Do I need to make some adjustments here? So there's like a very small adjustment right at the beginning, right? That Darla thought the vowel started a little earlier than I would say it started, for example. And then we measure how much difference there is between Darla's boundaries and my boundaries. And this graph, you don't need to know too much about graphs to understand it, just that notice that most of the displacement, most of the differences are near the bottom here, meaning that there's hardly any difference for the most part between what Darla would do and what I would do. This is the boundary displacement in milliseconds, so most of the boundaries are quite accurate. I wasn't really making a ton of adjustments. But you can see that there are some outliers, right? Some of these dots that are way up here, like in some cases, Darla was a full second off in aligning the speech. So those are bigger errors, right? That actually did need quite a bit of correction. Most of the errors were in things that were kind of expected based on previous research. So things like, when somebody spoke really quickly, like this little sample here, it's quite quiet. It looks very faint in the spectrogram. And yeah, it's really rapid that this person is saying, that's all I got. And Darla thought that utterance stretched much further into this like okay and which actually are quite long, these filler words, compared to this really rapid and quiet, that's all I got. So that was a kind of error that Darla made, and something that previous research has found too, that rapid and quiet speech is particularly hard for an automated system to pick up accurately. The other thing that we saw is that Spanish words got transcribed as though they were English, right? Because Darla is trained on English. So this is an example of a Spanish word, tranquilo, that's being transcribed as though it's like tranquilo, right? Like an English word, tranquil, with an O on the end, right? It's doing its best to try to turn that into an English word, but that means that it's not correct, right? And it doesn't accurately represent the Spanish sounds. It's interpreting it as English. So that's another place where we saw errors. But generally, it did pretty well. It was like as accurate as we had seen in previous studies. Over 80% of the sounds were aligned within 20 milliseconds, so pretty close. Errors that we saw were pretty much what we expected based on previous work. So we could see the places we need to double check, like rapid speech or laughter or background noise, or those Spanish code switching instances. So this was something we presented last year at NWAVE, a big sociolinguistics conference, to just let people know that Darla is a good tool for non-standard varieties of English too, as long as you know what to look out for, right? The kinds of corrections you're likely to need to make. So then we wanted to know, okay, what can we find from Darla then? If it works well enough for processing these bilingual speech files, what could we look at more specifically? And we decided to focus on vowel production. For one thing, Darla automatically also extracts vowel information. Vowels are something we like to look at in sociolinguistics because there's a lot of dialect variation in vowels. But also, it's something that's a little bit understudied in disordered populations in particular. We tend to focus a lot on consonant production in speech sounds in disordered populations, but not as much on vowels. So it seemed like a good area to look for that reason as well. So we started with just a kind of case series approach. 2 female speakers we're comparing and 2 males. The female pair, we had one typically developing speaker who reported Spanish dominance, one with a history of receiving speech and language services, who was English dominant. So a couple differences between our female speakers. Our male pair were both English dominant speakers, one typically developing and one with a history of receiving speech and language services. And so we run these through Darla, and it extracts the vowel measurements and creates plots of the vowel space. So a little getting into some linguistic weeds here, but I'll make it pretty simple. This chart represents like the inside of your mouth. So on this side, you've got the front of your mouth, back of your mouth on this side, top and bottom, right? And your vowels are arranged within that vowel space, something like an E, your tongue is high and front, right? As opposed to an oo, where your tongue is high and back. Yeah, try it out. Or an ah, where your jaw is very low and kind of in the middle of your mouth. So that's what this is representing. And we're really just looking at the overall vowel space. What can we see here? So our red speaker, what we noticed here is that their vowel space is a little narrower than the blue speaker, right? All their vowels kind of fall within, in a front to back dimension, this narrower space. And this speaker is a Spanish dominant speaker. Whereas the blue speaker, the one with the history of receiving speech and language services, theirs is a little like vertically compressed, right? They don't have as much, as much vertical dispersion in their vowel space. It's a little squished. Our male speakers look a lot more similar to each other. Overall, their vowel dispersion is pretty similar, especially in the front-back dimension. The blue speaker does potentially have a little more squishing, especially if we exclude these high vowels. Like all of these blue dots fit within the red space, right? So maybe we're again seeing that our speaker with a history of receiving speech and language services has a little more of that vertical compression. So we were thinking, maybe this is a suggestion. It's only, very preliminary kind of work, but this lack of variation in tongue height, how high or low you're moving your tongue, that is something that could affect your speech intelligibility, right? If you're not moving your tongue as much up and down, maybe that's somewhat related to your history of receiving speech and language services. In the female pair, that front-back difference could be related to the one speaker's Spanish dominance, because we do see in Spanish, typically the front vowels are a little further back than in English. So maybe that's what we're seeing in that comparison. So this kind of preliminary case series we presented at CASHA, the California Speech Language Hearing Association, just in March. And so now we can move forward with this and start looking at our full sample of speakers, since we know that the tools work well enough with some human correction, and we maybe do see some differences that are interesting. We can start analyzing the rest of the participants, and that's what we're doing now. So far, 5 students have been involved in these presentations. 2 of them are continuing this year, along with 3 new students. And it's just been a really fun way for them to get to see how this stuff that they're learning in class, applies to research and to the real world. And they can really make these contributions that so far have been really well received at the conferences. So there we are at our couple of conferences, our students. And yeah, thanks so much for listening. Oh, Chad, you're muted.
Oh, sorry, I was cheering and clapping. I love seeing how your research has gone from the Canadian vowel sounds to Spanish speaker, English speaker vowel sounds. So it's actually continued from what you were always doing, but now has taken on this California flavor and seems just so important. I love that Cal State San Bernardino is leading the way in this particular research. Good work, Erin. Fascinating.
Thank you.
Make some comments and ask questions of Erin, and we'll also have Q&A at the very end if we don't run out of time. But I want to get to Kevin Zhang. Oh my God, I'm so happy to meet this amazing human being. Kevin Zhang's work as a composer and experimental musician encompasses instrumental, vocal, electronic, and electroacoustic concert music, along with field recordings, sound walks, site-specific installations. I saw a lot in the research of these installations where there's a sound installation presentation that people interact with over time, and interdisciplinary projects involving film, theater, and dance. His compositions have been presented internationally in places like Germany, Singapore, and France, if you've heard of those places, and nationally at the Here Now Music Festival in Los Angeles, the Moxonic Festival in Missouri, the VU or VU Symposium for Experimental Electronic and Improvised Music in Utah, and more. Wow. At CSUSB, he teaches courses in music composition, theory, electronic music, and directs the CSUSB New Music Ensemble. And you're likely to see some of us in one of your next classes. Please welcome the great Kevin Zhang.
Great. Thanks, Chad. That was an awesome introduction. I hope everyone can hear me okay. As of a few minutes ago, the landscapers decided to start doing some figure eights on lawnmowers right outside my window. So I'll try and deal with that. But if I look distracted, that's probably why. Anyways, I hope you hear me okay. I am going to focus this talk on a couple of my recent pieces of creative work. So I am a composer. I work in a variety of different media. As Chad mentioned, my training growing up was in classical composition. Along the way in grad school or around then, I started focusing a lot on writing for the stage. So for example, my MFA thesis was a chamber opera. And then later on, I also started working more collaboratively with dance choreography and also with film scoring. And a lot of this work was also for both electronic and electroacoustic instruments. But anyways, today you can see, I hope you can see my slide here okay. So there's two pieces here, two examples of what we, in composition refer to broadly under the umbrella of concert music. So music for instrumental or vocal or electroacoustic combinations that's really aimed for a live performance in a stage or concert setting. One is this project for piano trio that I wrote last year, Placed in a Puzzling Light and Moving. The title, by the way, I stole from an Ashbery poem. I usually do steal most of my titles from literary sources. And then the other one is a vocal ensemble composition, Torso Air. That one is a text setting of an Ocean Vuong poem from I think 2016 or 2017 or so. The piece, I originally wrote that in 2019, but I decided to share this one today because I recently, earlier this summer, late spring, I made a revision to it for a festival in LA who performed. They put this piece on, and I just got the documentation back very recently. So I figured this was a nice chance to show that video. Cool. Okay. So I'll start with the instrumental project, Placed in a Puzzling Light and Moving. So if I generalize broadly what the types of stuff that interests me as a composer, a lot of it has to do with I think of the physicality and the visceralness of music and of sound making. It was actually kind of interesting to listen to Erin talk about her quantitative work in that avenue just now. But anyways, as you all know, music is a pretty ephemeral medium. It exists in time, it's temporal. And also, it may surprise a lot of my students here because I teach music theory courses, so they're used to me talking in abstractions, talking about names of notes or chords or whatever, things that are actually, they're constructed ideas, right? They're not physical things in front of us. So when I write music, I often am very interested in stuff like the stereo field, what's happening on the left, what's happening on the right, and how do they interact? How do timbres of sound interact with each other or combine with each other? When you sing, like the breath that you take, or when you play a wind instrument, when you inhale and you exhale, when you sing words, like the actual, the quality of the sound of the words that you're uttering, stuff like the clicks of a key on a woodwind instrument, or the the friction of of the horsehair of a violin bow going against the vibrating strings of that instrument. So I'm really interested in exploring those types of stuff when I write for these types of instruments. I'm always trying to visualize what's happening. So yeah, so this piece was written in collaboration with, let me go to my next slide, the Getman Trio. They're an ensemble originally from Greece. I think the pianist now lives in Switzerland. They work mostly with contemporary composers. By the way, let me go back. Piano trio is what we call this particular combination of instruments: piano, violin, cello. It does not mean 3 pianists, but a piano, violin, and cello is a fairly classic instrumental combination. It's really associated with 19th century music, Beethoven. I think Beethoven specifically. It fell a little bit out of favor during the 20th century. Other ensembles like the string quartet or heterogeneous groups like the Pierrot ensemble eventually, took more interest from those composers. So this group, they're really interested in working, almost exclusively with living composers. They engaged in a pretty big tour early 2024. So they commissioned me to write this piece for them on that tour of the West Coast of the United States. Here they were visiting our department. We got I applied for and got an intellectual life grant to have them visit our campus. I don't know if any of the jurors for that grant are in this room, but if you are, thank you so much. So here they are talking with our music students about their work, about demonstrating some of the techniques, doing a lecture recital on some of these pieces they commissioned. This here is the Ashbery text. My piece is not really, it's not really a setting of the text. It's not about the poem really, but I don't know if, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this particular text in particular, but it is a weirdly naturalistic one. It's about, well, trees. It's about if you think about it, the funny juxtaposition of the very orderly network quality of the branching fractalingness of them, but also in a way like the randomness of them, right? The fact that on some level, they grow here and then they're always stuck here. I just thought that was an interesting metaphor to explore musically with certain sonic objects and how they appear, but how they also relate environmentally, if you follow that metaphor to other things around them. I do have a video that I think I will play. Yeah, this blank slide is my cue to transition to my to share my video. Let me check my time. I'll go for about a 3-minute excerpt. The piece is about 8 minutes. I don't think we want to hear the whole thing, but I'll play around the last 3 or so minutes. Let me just make sure that my computer share sound is on before I try to do this. Okay. And I'll mute myself so you don't hear me over this. For the sake of time, I'll just end that video early so I can just quickly for a minute or so talk about the other piece that I wanted to share. That, by the way, was a video of them at the they were performing this at Stanford at the Karma, the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics up at Stanford as part of their tour last year. Okay. I wanted to show this other piece. This is the piece I just revised for the Here Now Festival in LA last or this past summer or late spring. It's a setting of Ocean Vuong's Torso of Air. Ocean Vuong is, I first discovered him around 2016, 2017 or so, and I had like a period of pretty intense obsession with a lot of his texts. So in 2019 for the Royal Festival, let me go back 2 pages. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but I'm trying to circle the left picture. So that was the original premiere. This was a rehearsal for the original premiere of this piece back that summer. Royal is a music festival up in the north of France. It's held at this really beautiful venue up there. And this piece has, it's been one of my more performed pieces at this point. Over here on the right, this is the Northwestern University's student choir, the Benin Contemporary Early Vocal Music Ensemble. They put on this piece at one of their festivals, which year was this, 2022. And then over here on the left, this is the Hex Vocal Ensemble. They are a really fabulous professional vocal group based here in Southern California. They asked me to do a revision of this piece so that it could be performed in, for their particular combination of voices. So I wanted to show, I wanted to just have this text up here. I'm not going to try and read it or try and really analyze it, but I do think I want to, part of what really drew to me to take on this challenge of setting this one for choir was a lot of the very, I don't know, I think I'm repeating myself, but there's a certain physicality and visceralness to a lot of these words and phrases. I don't know if I think Erin might have a field day with just the first line, like the word suppose. That's a really complex, that's a really complex word. And it's actually really hard to sing beautifully, or to sing at all, or just to say, I think. The word change is also another example, but I really wanted to give it a shot at deconstructing in a way these sounds when I disperse them amongst the members of the choir. For those of you who read music, this is how I set the word change. I took on what we call word painting, which is to actually change the sound of the word across the time it takes to sing them. So I use these empty note heads to stand for the white noise sound of the sh sound before it becomes the actual vocalized, the ange, that diphthong vowel-y, that very ugly ange, sound that I actually wanted to highlight. Sorry, the lawnmower has appeared again and is now distracting me. I used a lot of canonic material. Here, if you follow this phrase here that's being said is night sealed with bruises. But if you follow left to right, the different times in which each individual voice says these or sings or utters these syllables, they're all dispersed in time. And I did use some elements of indeterminate notation on the word carve, so that we get the sea of sound on it's almost like this sonic painting of the actual gesture of carving. So I know we're kind of out of time, I think. I could maybe just play perhaps just the last minute of the composition, and then we could segue into just general discussion. Okay, let me make sure my share sound is on for this. Okay. The last word that they were sitting on was the word waiting. The text ended with just the word waiting, so I kind of took a bit of an extra word painting there and just have them sit on that word for a while. But yeah, but thanks everyone. Yeah, that is my presentation.